Welcome to Heartline Stories. Today's story follows a poor student who marries an elderly billionaire, and just a week later, she makes a shocking discovery that changes everything. As the truth unfolds, her life is turned upside down. What is the secret her husband is hiding? How will this discovery impact her future? Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unexpected twists and turns. Sophie was a 22-year-old college student living in a small town in Ohio. She worked part-time at a local cafe to support herself through school, but she always dreamed of a better life. Her life was simple, and she had many goals, one of which was to finish college and land a great job. But little did she know, her life was about to take an unexpected turn. One chilly autumn day, while Sophie was working her shift at the cafe, an elderly man walked in. He had gray hair, a wrinkled face, and a kind smile. He looked like he had lived a full life, but there was something mysterious about him. He ordered a cup of coffee and sat down at the window, quietly watching the rain outside. Sophie, busy with her orders, didn't notice him at first, but as she passed by him, he spoke. "Excuse me, miss," he said gently. "You seem like a bright young lady. Can I ask you something?" Sophie stopped and turned, a little surprised. "Sure. How can I help you?" "My name is George, and I couldn't help but notice how hard you work. It's rare to see such dedication in a young person these days." Sophie smiled. "Thank you, sir. I try my best." George nodded thoughtfully, then added, "How would you like a job? A job that could change your life forever?" Sophie blinked. A job? She had been struggling to pay for school, but she never imagined something this big. "What kind of job?" she asked, curious. George smiled. "I have a small company. It's not much, but I need someone with your energy. The pay is good, and I think you'd fit right in." Sophie was shocked. She had never thought about working for an elderly billionaire, but the offer seemed too good to pass up. After some thought, she decided to take him up on the offer. A week later, Sophie was standing at the doorstep of George's mansion, feeling both excited and nervous. She had no idea that the old man, George, was a billionaire. He had never mentioned it, but as Sophie walked through his enormous home, she began to realize that this was no ordinary man. George treated her like family. He was kind, funny, and always took the time to listen to Sophie. As days passed, Sophie found herself opening up to him more and more. She told him about her dreams, her struggles, and her desire to make a difference in the world. George, in turn, shared stories of his life and business, and they spent long evenings chatting over tea. It wasn't long before George proposed to Sophie. At first, Sophie was taken aback. She had just met him a week ago. She didn't know much about him except that he had been kind and generous. However, his proposal wasn't just a whim. He had developed a deep affection for her, and he promised to make her life better in every way possible. Sophie was unsure, but her heart told her to trust him. The idea of marrying someone so wealthy sounded surreal, but she was swept up in the excitement of the moment. She agreed, and soon they were married in a private ceremony, with only a few close friends and family in attendance. The first few days of their marriage were wonderful. Sophie enjoyed the luxurious lifestyle George provided. She was living in a beautiful mansion, wearing designer clothes and traveling to exotic places. But as the week went by, Sophie began to notice strange things. One evening, after dinner, George excused himself to attend to some business calls. Sophie, feeling curious, decided to explore the mansion a bit more. She had never seen the entire house and was eager to discover more of the beautiful rooms. As she wandered through the house, she found a door that led to a room she hadn't seen before. It was locked, but Sophie's curiosity got the best of her, and she managed to find a key nearby. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was filled with old photographs, antiques, and a large desk stacked with papers. But what caught Sophie's eye was a photo frame sitting on the desk. It was a picture of George, but the woman standing next to him in the photo looked exactly like Sophie. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. How could this be? The woman in the picture looked like her, but it couldn't be her. She took a closer look at the photo. It was dated more than 20 years ago. Suddenly, Sophie heard footsteps behind her. She turned around, and there stood George, his face pale. "What are you doing in here, Sophie?" he asked, his voice sharp. Sophie froze. I, I found the room and this picture. She pointed to the photo of the woman who looked exactly like her. George sighed and walked over to the desk. He picked up the frame and placed it back on the desk carefully. You need to know something, Sophie. There's a lot about me you don't know. Sophie's mind raced. Who is she? Why does she look like me? George sat down slowly. That woman was my late wife. Her name was Sarah. She died many years ago, and it was a tragedy. But the truth is, I never stopped thinking about her. I couldn't let go of the memory of her. Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. But, but why do I look so much like her? George took a deep breath. Sophie, I need to tell you something important. Something I never thought I'd have to share. His voice trembled. Sarah and I had always wanted children, but we couldn't have any. But before she passed, we went to a fertility clinic, and they saved her embryos. It turns out, you're not just a random woman. You are Sarah's biological daughter. Sophie's eyes widened. What? How? How is that even possible? George looked at her with sad eyes. The clinic mixed up the embryos, Sophie. You were meant to be with someone else, but fate brought you here. You are not just a stranger to me. You are my daughter's child. I didn't realize it until I saw you for the first time. You have her eyes, her smile, and that's why I felt drawn to you. Sophie stumbled back, overwhelmed by the news. She had married a man who was not just her husband, but also her biological grandfather. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. George's face was filled with guilt. I didn't know how to, and I never expected to fall in love with you. But I never meant to hurt you, Sophie. The truth hung in the air between them, heavy and confusing. Sophie's world was spinning. The man she had married was not only much older than her, but he was now revealed to be connected to her in a way she couldn't have imagined. Sophie had always been told she was adopted, but never did she imagine that her biological connection would lead her to such a shocking discovery. Sophie stood there, stunned, as the weight of George's words sank in. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her mind raced, and her heart beat faster than she had ever felt before. The room felt suffocating, and the man she had married, the man who had shown her so much kindness, now seemed like a stranger. George watched her closely, his face full of concern. Sophie, I know this is a lot to process, but I wanted you to know the truth. I never meant for this to be so complicated. Sophie took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. But how could this happen? How am I your granddaughter? Why would they mix up the embryos? George walked over to her, his voice soft. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake at that clinic. But it's the truth. You've been a part of my life for much longer than you realized. I just didn't know until I saw you. I thought I was marrying a stranger, but it turns out you are the daughter of my late wife, Sarah. Sophie's mind spun. The thought of being George's granddaughter, of being related to the woman in the photo, made her feel like she was caught in a whirlwind. She had so many questions, but she didn't know where to start. And your family, Sophie asked, her voice trembling. What are they going to think when they find out? George sighed deeply. I haven't told them yet, and I don't even know how to. I was hoping that you and I could figure this out together, but I understand if you need space. Sophie glanced at the photograph of Sarah again, then looked back at George. I don't know if I can process all this. I don't know what to think. George nodded, his eyes filled with regret. I know, Sophie. I didn't want to put you through this, but you deserve to know. I'll give you time, but I hope we can find a way to make this work. I care about you deeply. This situation, it's complicated, but I want you to know that you are important to me. Sophie was silent, torn between the love and the shock of it all. Part of her wanted to run away, to forget everything, and just be a normal 22-year-old again. But another part of her was drawn to the man in front of her. She had married him, and despite everything, she could see that he cared for her. They had built something together in just a short time, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to throw it all away. After a long pause, Sophie finally spoke. I need some time, George. I can't process this all at once. George nodded, understanding. Of course, take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. Sophie slowly walked out of the room, her head spinning with emotions she couldn't even describe. She had gone from being a poor college student with no idea of what her future held to being married to a billionaire who was also her biological grandfather. The man who had promised to make her life better now seemed to be the source of so many unanswered questions. As she sat in the living room, Sophie found herself staring at the photo of Sarah, her biological mother, and wondering what had led to all this. She had always known there was a part of her life that didn't make sense, but she never imagined it would be this complicated. Hours passed and Sophie's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone, so she hesitated before answering. When she opened it, her heart skipped a beat. Standing in front of her was a young woman about her age, holding a large envelope in her hand. She looked at Sophie with an intense gaze. "Are you Sophie?" the woman asked. "I have something that belongs to you." Sophie was taken aback. "Who are you?" she asked, confused. The woman smiled softly. "I'm Olivia. I'm Sarah's sister, and I think we need to talk." Sophie's mind raced again. Sarah's sister? What was happening now? Before Sophie could say anything, Olivia handed her the envelope. "This has been waiting for you. I think it's time you see what's inside." Sophie hesitated, her hands shaking as she took the envelope. She slowly opened it, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside was a stack of old letters, photographs, and documents that seemed to hold the key to everything. Olivia watched her closely. "These letters are from Sarah, written before she passed away. They might help you understand everything, including why you're here and why George has been so secretive." Sophie didn't know what to think. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of confusion and emotions. But she knew one thing for sure. This was another piece of the puzzle she had to figure out. As Sophie looked up at Olivia, she finally spoke. "I need to understand everything. I don't know how much more I can take, but I need to know the truth." Olivia nodded. "I understand. I'm here to help. But you need to be ready for what's inside these letters. It might change everything." Sophie stared at the envelope in her hands, her heart racing. She had no idea what was about to happen, but she knew her life would never be the same again. Sophie carefully opened the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. Inside, there were multiple yellowed pages, some handwritten, others typed. She could tell immediately that these letters were old, probably from the time before she was born. She glanced at Olivia, who stood by the door, watching her closely. "Do you think I'm ready for this?" Sophie asked, her voice barely a whisper. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Olivia gave a soft, reassuring smile. "You don't have to read them all at once, but I think it's time you started understanding the full picture." Sophie nodded slowly and sat down at the nearby table, unfolding the first letter carefully. It was written in Sarah's neat handwriting, the ink faded but still legible. The letter began, "My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, it means that life has been very different than I ever imagined. I've kept secrets from you, but now it's time to reveal them. There's so much you don't know, and I hope you understand why I had to keep it all hidden for so long." Sophie paused for a moment, feeling her heart race as she continued reading. She could already sense that whatever was coming next was going to change everything. The letter went on. "Your father was never just an ordinary man. He's someone powerful, someone who's been part of my life for years. But there are things about him you must know, things that no one else can understand. I was forced to keep this secret from you, and from everyone else." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. Her father. She had always thought George was her husband, and the idea of him being her biological grandfather still left her feeling like she was living in a dream. But her father? The mystery deepened with each word. As she read more, she learned that Sarah had been in a complicated relationship with George long before she met Sophie's mother. The two had once been deeply in love, but circumstances had separated them for years. And through all of it, Sarah had made a decision to let George go, but not without a promise. "Sophie," the letter continued, "you were meant to know the truth one day. I wanted you to have a life of your own, without the burden of our past. But now I realize that keeping you in the dark was a mistake. You deserve to know who you are. You are part of a legacy that stretches further than you can imagine. And George, he's more than you think. Sophie slowly put the letter down. She felt overwhelmed by the words. The person she had thought she knew so well, the man she married, had a past full of secrets, and it turned out that her own family history was tangled in a web of lies. The shock of everything hit her all at once, and she needed a moment to process what she had just read. Olivia, who had been standing quietly, moved towards Sophie. "Do you want to read the rest?" Sophie nodded. "Yes, I think I need to. But I don't understand why George never told me about this. Why did he keep everything hidden?" Olivia took a seat beside her, her expression sympathetic. "Your grandfather didn't want you to carry the burden of his choices, Sophie. It's complicated, but I believe now is the time for you to know everything, even if it's painful." Sophie looked back at the letters in her hands. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more she had yet to uncover. She had already learned so much, but she needed answers to the questions swirling in her mind. With a deep breath, Sophie picked up another letter. This one looked slightly different, typed instead of handwritten. It read, "Sophie, I know this will be difficult for you to hear, but you must know that your life was part of a plan long before you came into the world. George made a promise to me before I died, and I made one to him. You are the key to everything that's to come." Sophie stopped reading for a moment, her heart pounding. What was this plan? Was there something bigger that she hadn't understood? Was she a part of something that had been orchestrated long ago? The letter continued. "You were meant to marry George, Sophie. He was always meant to be your partner in life. But the circumstances of our lives have never been simple. I hope one day you can forgive me for keeping all this from you." Sophie's head spun. A plan? A marriage arranged before her birth? She couldn't believe it. Everything about her life was being turned upside down. She put the letter down slowly, feeling her thoughts collide. George had been keeping these secrets from her. But why? And why was she the one caught in the middle of it all? She stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the vast estate that had become her home. It felt so strange now, so unfamiliar. Her life had changed in the blink of an eye. "Olivia, I have to know the full truth," Sophie said, her voice shaky but determined. "What did Sarah mean by the plan? What is going on?" Olivia gave a small nod. "I think you need to meet someone. Someone who can explain everything. Someone who can help you understand why your life turned out this way." Sophie felt her heart skip a beat. Who is this person? Olivia hesitated for a moment. "I'll tell you, but you need to be ready. This person is connected to George in a way you can't even imagine. And their story will change everything." Sophie's breath hitched. More secrets? Is this going to get even more complicated? Sophie asked, feeling the weight of the past few days crash down on her. Olivia looked at her seriously. "It might, but you deserve to know the truth. No more secrets. It's time for you to understand your place in all of this." Sophie stood by the window, her mind racing. She couldn't believe what she had just learned. The revelations about George's past, the secret plan, and the truth about her life. It was all so overwhelming. She was unsure of what to do next. "Olivia, what do I do now?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling. She turned to face her friend, her mind struggling to catch up with the revelations. "How can I face George after everything?" Olivia placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder, offering her some comfort. "You don't have to face it alone, Sophie, but you do need to make a choice. You have the power to decide what's next." Sophie nodded slowly, taking in Olivia's words. She had always felt like an outsider in the wealthy world she had married into. Now it seemed that the life she had known was built on a foundation of secrets, and Sophie was struggling to understand her place in all of it. "There's someone I need you to meet," Olivia said, her voice soft but firm. "This person can help you make sense of everything, Sophie. They hold the missing pieces of the puzzle." Sophie wasn't sure what to think, but a part of her knew she couldn't keep running away from the truth. She had to confront the past, even if it meant uncovering things she wasn't ready for. Olivia led Sophie to a small guest house on the estate. The moment they stepped inside, Sophie saw a man sitting at a desk, surrounded by old documents. He looked up as they entered, and Sophie was taken aback by how familiar he seemed, though she had never seen him before. "This is Marcus," Olivia said gently. He's the one who can help you understand everything. Marcus stood up and smiled warmly. Sophie, I know this might be overwhelming, but I'm here to help you. We've been waiting for you to be ready to hear the truth. Sophie's heart raced. She had so many questions, but at that moment, she wasn't sure where to start. I don't understand, Sophie began, her voice wavering. Why has everything been kept from me? What's the plan? Why did George and Sarah hide it all? Marcus walked over to her and placed a gentle hand on her arm. There's a lot to explain, Sophie, but I can tell you this. The life you've been living, it's been part of something much bigger than you realize. Your marriage to George, your connection to Sarah, it was all part of a plan that began years ago. Sophie felt her head spin. But why? What was the purpose? Marcus sighed, then looked into her eyes. Your family, your legacy, it's more than you think. There are forces at play here, things beyond what anyone could have imagined. George was never just a man of wealth. He's connected to something much bigger. And so are you. Sophie could barely process his words. I'm connected to what? Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to a drawer and pulled out a folder. He handed it to Sophie, who opened it cautiously. Inside were photographs, documents, and even old letters. She recognized the faces in the photos. George, Sarah, and some people she didn't recognize. This, Marcus said, is the history of your family. You were born into something much larger than you could have known, and I believe the time has come for you to step into your role in this. Sophie took in the weight of his words. There was no turning back now. She could feel the gravity of the situation pulling her deeper into something she didn't fully understand yet. Your life is about to change in ways you can't imagine, Marcus said, and so is George's. You've always been connected, but now you're about to find out just how deeply. Sophie didn't know what to say. Everything in her life had been turned upside down, but now for the first time, she felt like she was beginning to see the bigger picture. She wasn't just the wife of a wealthy man. She was part of something much grander. The question was she ready for it? With a deep breath, Sophie stood up, the weight of the future pressing on her chest. I don't know what's coming next, she said softly, but I'm ready to find out. Marcus smiled. That's the first step, Sophie. The path ahead won't be easy, but you have everything you need to face it. Sophie nodded, looking at the documents in her hands. There were still so many unanswered questions, but for the first time, she felt a sense of clarity. The plan, whatever it was about to unfold before her, and Sophie was ready to face whatever came her way. Thank you for joining us on this Heartline story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Sometimes things aren't always what they seem. Truth can change everything,